So for today's video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over the news about Code Geass Rozé of the Recapture. I'll give a quick summary, my impressions, my predictions, and my hopes for what is going to happen going forward with Code Geass and just the whole franchise in general. Quick bullet points. Rozé of the Recapture is going to take place after the R3 movie, or Lelouch of the Resurrection. It'll be 4 OVA episodes and it'll come out in May 2024. The original title for Rozé was Zed of the Recapture, and no one really knows why the name was changed. I saw someone on Twitter say it could be because of the Russia-Ukraine war, but I don't really know too much about that, so I'm not going to say that's the definitive reason. The main characters are two brothers, Rozé and Ash, and they are mercenaries who, apparently according to the trailer, they've betrayed someone or a group at some point. I don't know why they've gone with the brother plotline again. That's what they did in Akito, and it was bad. The director for Rozé is Yoshimitsu Ohashi. He worked on the first episode of Akito. He worked on Cross Angie, Galaxy Angel, Gundam Iron-Blooded Orphans, 00 and Seed, Planet Test, which is a very good show. And he was the director for the anime adaptation of Witchblade, which is actually a very good anime. I do recommend that. The script will be written by Noboru Kimura. He's worked on Amagami SS, which is also a very good anime adaptation. He also worked on Cross Angie, as well as Gundam Build Divers and Gundam Age. The character designers are Shuichi Shimamura, who was the previous chief animation director for the Akito OVAs, and Takehiro Kimura, who has sadly passed away during production. The music will be handled by Kenji Kawai, who, if you know Ghost in the Shell, his name will pop up, so that's something to look forward to, I think. He also worked on Mason Ikoku's music, as well as Ranma Half, Gundam 00, and the Studio Dean adaptation of Fate Stay Night. First impressions so far for Rozé is that there's going to be fan service in these OVAs, which I think is a good thing. There are people on the internet who talk about fan service and they say, oh, everything that has fan service in it is ruined, you should take it all out. But if you ask me, as a Code Geass fan, if you say something like Code Geass should never have fan service, or it should tone it down, or any bullshit like that, then you're essentially saying that Kimura Sensei's work on Code Geass and everything prior to Code Geass should just not exist. And I think if you say something like that, you are disrespecting him, you're disrespecting Code Geass, and you should stop calling yourself a fan. Okay, so now that my hot take is out of the way on that one, I think the Nightmares designs look okay. I'm really not a fan of the CGI, which they brought over from Akito, and they did it in R3, and that's just something we have to live with now because what can you do? We don't live in that era anymore. I did notice that Rozé is just 0, kind of weird. The poster has a Char clone, and I'm not terribly happy about that because that just gives more credence to all the people who say that Code Geass is just a pseudo Gundam or just another Gundam story. But look, I promise you that they are very distinct, and I'm very tired of people saying that it's just a Gundam show. Like, if you talk about it from a superficial perspective, then yeah, Code Geass and Gundam have similarities, like Lelouch and Char, Atherin and Kira, and Lelouch and Suzaku using mechs to fight in a war, but I'm really tired of seeing people say that it's just another Gundam story. It's not, it's very different, and if I go into all the details, I'd be here all day. One of the protagonists, his name is Ash. He seems to be wearing what looks like a Wyvern Zero pilot suit, and Wyvern Zero was a military group in Akito, which doesn't fill me with much optimism, if I'm being honest, because I don't like Akito, and I don't like what it did to the canon, but it does imply that Ash might have fought in the EU war in some way, or maybe it's just a coincidence. It could be that. Based on the trailer and the characters and what we've seen so far, the story might be based in Britannia. When you look at Rosé's dialogue in the trailer, he talks about how his brothers of the far north killed too many Japanese, and if you know about Britannian geography, then north of Britannia would be Canada, so that could be the far north people, and killing too many Japanese could imply the Area 11 occupation and the war. Also, the Char clone, based on the fact that he's a blonde guy and he's wearing a mask, it could be that he's part of a Britannian faction. And in the poster as well, we have a Shrine Maiden girl who's basically the Lala clone because, of course, thanks Sunrise. And that implies Japan is still somehow involved in the story, I'm guessing. Okay, so for predictions, I'm just going to come out and say it that there is no way that Sunrise will leave out Lelouch and C2 because they are by far the most popular characters in Code Geass, especially long after the original series finished. So at the very least, I think they're going to have a cameo role in Rozé of the Recapture. I really hope they don't play too big of a role because I think Lelouch's story is finished where it is, and I'd rather they leave it alone. I definitely think Zero or Suzaku is going to play a much bigger role in Rozé than perhaps I would like. But that's because, Zero's role is so different after the events of R2, so I can understand why he would get involved with trying to quell all these conflicts and stuff. Nunnally's probably going to be alongside Zero in Rozé, and that makes sense because obviously they're working together. As for Carlin, I really don't think she's going to make an appearance in Rozé, probably because the story is based in Britannia, and honestly I don't believe that the writers will really know how to insert Carlin into the story. And that goes for pretty much all the side characters from the original series, so that would be Toto, Rockshada and Schneisel, Ogi, and all those guys. I don't think they'll play much of a role at all if it's based in Britannia. You might see the authority figures, so like Kaguya, Empress Tianzi, you might see them show up for political reasons. And the main reason I don't think the side characters will show up is because R3, or just the Resurrection movie, already played the nostalgia card from a marketing perspective, so I don't really see what else they could possibly do unless you involve Japan and other factions in the story. If Rozé is based in Britannia, then Oz the Reflection is almost certainly going to make an appearance in some way, like the characters and their stories might have a sequel. The Shark clone I mentioned earlier, because he's wearing a mask, I assume he's going to lead some sort of rebellious faction or some sort of antagonist faction, so maybe he leads an anti-Nunnally faction within Britannia, which could have implications about the consequences of Emperor Lelouch dismantling Britannian culture, which I think would actually be an interesting plotline to follow through with, so who knows. If the story decides to take place in the EU again, then it's possible that Rozé and Ash being mercenaries would play into the post-war EU politics. And that honestly to me doesn't sound terribly interesting because again, I didn't like Akito at all. I think it's terrible and I'm not really interested in seeing the EU be looked at again. My last two predictions for Rozé is somebody is going to have a Geass again in the story, and I really don't want them to keep bringing more Geass users into the fold because that just complicates the story more, and most likely it's going to be the Shark clone, which is why he's the Shark clone and why he's wearing a mask and doing all that stuff, so hooray for convoluted bullshit. And lastly, I've seen comments talking about Rozé and kind of the implications to the lore, like the expanded Code Geass lore beyond the original series, and honestly, there is just no way that 4 OVA episodes will be enough to expand on what's already there in ways people think it will. Akito had 5 OVA episodes and all that did was introduce more questions, answered none of them, and the story was just terrible and ruined the canon. So what do I actually hope for from Rozé? Well, the first two things I want to mention is I don't want Rozé to explore or explain the origins of Geass or the Order or anything like that. Every attempt to do so has just been absolutely terrible. Akito is bad. I hated Renya. I actually stopped reading Renya years ago because I didn't like the lore implications at all. And if we look at what Taniguchi and Okochi have talked about with the expanded universe and the original series, Okochi has explicitly stated in an interview during the R3 theatrical run that he doesn't want the questions of Geass to be answered. And I agree with him on that because I'd rather it be left as this kind of mysterious entity that plays into the larger story when it needs to without also having to complicate and contradict what already exists, because every time they do that it just doesn't make sense, introducing all these immortal characters that never existed beforehand. And don't even get me started on Renya's whole thing about turning everything into a shonen battle. I didn't like that at all either. And one thing I definitely hope they don't do as well, which is what they did in Akito, is I don't want the nightmares to actually run with their feet. That goes completely against what we understand with Code Geass's nightmare frames. They're not Gundams. Please don't do that again. So that's what I hope they don't do. So what do I actually hope they do? What I would do if I was in charge is I would expand not only on the consequences of Zero Requiem on the world, which is what they did in R3 more so already, but I would also think if the story's a Britannian story, that they would actually explore the consequences of Emperor Lelouch dismantling Britannian culture, which is what I mentioned earlier. I think looking into the political consequences of Lelouch doing that would actually be a pretty interesting story. That's something I would like to watch. Something that I'm really hoping for, but I'm not terribly optimistic about the odds, is that the people who are working on Code Geass, like the staff members from Sunrise, try to actually understand that Code Geass is not just another Gundam story. I think we really need to appreciate that Code Geass has its own merits, its own flavor of storytelling, its own way of looking at things in the world. The problem is Sunrise is notoriously bad at handling Code Geass. And the 10-year plan that they announced back in 2017, all we got out of that is 4 movies, 2 mobile games, and this new OVA series. And I just don't think that's good enough in terms of like actually expanding Code Geass's brand, which maybe that's for the best considering what we've seen with anime over the last 10-20 years and the trajectory it's gone on, and all the problems with international distribution as well, like Crunchyroll and Sony and all that stuff. So in hindsight, it's probably for the best that we don't get a lot of new Code Geass stuff, because all it does is just ruin the lore and complicates everything, and I really don't like that. I don't appreciate that. But my final hope really for Rozé is I just want the story to be good. Like, everyone pretends that Akito the Exiled is good because people like Giguk said, oh, it's amazing, even though it really isn't. All the spin-off manga and stuff like that, like Renya, I hated. Oz the Reflection, I haven't actually read yet because there aren't many translated chapters that I can actually read. Like, the only thing I agree with Sunrise on is that they split the canon of Code Geass between the original TV series and all the picture dramas and sound episodes that are associated with it, with the new movie canon, which Taniguchi said in an interview during the R3 marketing campaign, is that all the side materials like Akito and Oz the Reflection and all that, that's all part of the movie canon. And the original series is left untouched as it is, and I feel like that's the best thing that you could do for that, because if you take what happened in Akito the Exiled and you wedge it into the 2 seasons of Code Geass that exist, you have to explain why Layla played absolutely no role whatsoever in R2 with her absolutely broken and ridiculous Geass power. And you have to explain that without just defaulting to, oh, well, Akito the Exile wasn't written at the time of R2, so therefore she couldn't have possibly played a role, which is bullshit because she's so unbelievably powerful and she saw what Lelouch was doing in the R2 and she just decided to do nothing. Overall, I will watch Rozé of the Recapture. I'm just not terribly thrilled about the idea. I just want Code Geass to be left alone now. And all the side material, all the new stuff that they keep introducing, it's just not good for the lore, and I just don't trust Sunrise to do the job it needs to take care of Code Geass like they do with Gundam. Like, I actually think there's some sort of like politics within the higher ups of Sunrise where they looked at the success of Code Geass and panicked and were like, oh my god, if Code Geass is more popular then Gundam will be dead, or some nonsense like that. So I actually think there was a lot of malicious mishandling of Code Geass, and we're seeing it now with the 10-year plan. Because even if you look at what already exists, there's just barely anything underneath the Code Geass brand. And what does exist is just subpar at best, if you could even say that. So yeah, I'll see you guys in May, and hopefully Rozé will not make me want to put a bullet in my head.